The Alps, 1,200 kilometers long and 250 kilometers wide. The highest mountain range in Europe stretches like a bow from the French Alps in the west into Slovenia in the east. The geological upheaval began in Earth's ancient past. The rugged cliff faces, the sharp ridges, and deep valleys are significant and world-renowned. But they are actually only a part of a much larger and more extensive mountain range on the Eurasian continent.
Die Alpen sind ein vergleichsweise kleines Gebirge.
The Alps form a relatively small mountain range compared to other mountain ranges, but the Alps are part of a larger range that stretches from the Pyrenees through the Alps, across the mountain ranges of Iran, and into the Himalayas. These massive mountains were formed by the collision of the Eurasian and the African continental plates. Ocean sediments, which had formed between the two continents, were squeezed upwards as the plates moved together, and these compacted sediments form the mountain ranges of today. Our expedition takes us from our home in the European Alps into the mountain landscapes of the Rocky Mountains in the USA. Here, the movement of the tectonic plates created a massive range of mountains stretching over 4,500 kilometers from north to south and up to 600 kilometers from east to west. We are looking at flora and fauna in the various landscapes, and we travel through some of the many national parks in the USA to do so. Our visit to the Teton and Glacier National Park took us by surprise at first. Did we really fly all the way across the Atlantic to find a landscape that was virtually the same as we have in Europe? Hello, are we in the Alps, in France, Slovenia, or the Norwegian mountains? Okay, a few animals, such as the striped squirrel for example, look a bit different. But the deer? It could just as well be roaming through the underbrush in the alpine region. Mountain streams, waterfalls, everything just like by us in Europe. No doubt about it, here as well the incredible beauty simply takes your breath away. But what is the explanation for the many similarities?
Die Gesteine auf dieser Welt.
Stone material all over the world is formed by physical forces, like sandstone being washed together into one place, for example. And it is made up of the same chemical elements the entire Earth is made of. So all stone material on Earth is going to share common characteristics.
Deswegen sind alle Gesteine auf dieser Welt miteinander vergleichbar.
Aha! So we recognize that the same physical conditions produce the same results. We had concluded as much as we traveled all around the world. Whether in the South American Andes, the high plateaus of Africa, in the Himalayas, or in Australia, the origins of the rock formations and stone material all over the world are related. To put it in simple layman's terms, seems crazy somehow. And all over the world, stones also provide a living environment for plants, animals, and people. And for millennia, they have been using stone to construct buildings such as houses and churches. In a few unusual places like Cooper Pedy in Australia, for example, some people still drill their homes directly into the cliffs, even in our modern times. It's pleasantly cool inside the rock. while outside things broil in the desert heat, and the living room walls are decorated with noble opal stones which would have cost a few thousand in a jewelry shop. It doesn't matter if you live on the seashore or in the interior. Nothing works without stone, whether sandstone, solidified lava, or granite. But let's continue our excursion through America. The fact that flora and fauna in America and Eurasia are identical to a great degree is a good indication that there must have been a land bridge connecting the two continents at the Bering Strait during the last ice age, an assumption supported by current scientific knowledge. That would have allowed the elk, a member of the deer family for example, to multiply on both continents. Today, elk is found not only in Sweden and Canada, but even in the Czech Republic and in North America as far south as Utah. And in all those places, they act like the big shots. Elk always have the right of way. Glacier National Park boasts of over 700 lakes. Almost all of them trace their origin back to the glacial activity in the region about 15,000 years ago. Today, only a few ice barriers remain of the massive glaciers of yesteryear. What they left behind is the fascinatingly beautiful landscape of mountains and valleys formed by glacial movement and the force of torrents of meltwater. It is worthy of note that most of the high Rocky Mountains, similar to the Himalayas, are located pretty far inland. Is there an explanation for that?
Auf diesem Globus hier kann man sehen, wie sich die Kontinente zueinander
On this
bewegen.
globe, you can see how the continents move in relation to one another. Here is Europe, and here you see the Alpine mountain range right into the Himalayas.
Den Himalaya hinein. Also den halben.
So the Alpine range stretches about halfway around the world.
Auf der anderen Seite des
North America is on the other side of the Atlantic. In between is an expansion zone. Here, the North American plate is moving away from the Eurasian plate at a speed of about 2 centimeters per year.
zusammengenommen 2 Zentimeter pro Jahr. Wenn man auf
Looking
die
across to the west coast of North America, you see another expansion area, this time in the Pacific. The east side of this expansion zone is being forced underneath the North American plate.
Das ist eine Verschluckungszone.
That is called a subduction zone, and that is where mountains are formed.
Und je nachdem, wie die
And depending on the angle of the subduction, whether steep or flat, the mountains will form either close to the coastline, like with the Andes, or farther inland, like the Rocky Mountains.
wie bei den Rocky Mountains.
For that reason, even expansive plateaus are found at great altitudes, often more than 2,000 meters above sea level. As a result, it is not unusual to see a lot of wild mountain-dwelling animals on the roads in the national parks. A herd of bighorn sheep ends up blocking traffic on their way to a better grazing ground. Thanks to the North American National Park's efficient environmental protection concept, the wild animal populations are large and healthy. The same is true for the white-tailed deer. They are related to the European deer but are significantly larger. They supposedly migrated into North America several thousands of years ago, probably during the Ice Age over the Bering Strait, like the elk and the caribou. But Yellowstone, the oldest national park in the world, has a lot more to offer than just the self-confident wild animals. Yellowstone Lake, for example, should be called a sea of the mountains. It is enormous in size. Besides the large whitetails, large herds of buffalo or bison range freely in Yellowstone. Thanks to Hollywood westerns for most people around the world, the buffalo stand as an icon for America. But the bison actually seems to have originated in Asia. The American buffalo is related to the European bison. Scientists believe that they also migrated to the American continent across the land bridge at the Bering Strait. In the meantime, they seem to put great effort, at least in the national park, into confirming the unfounded prejudice that Americans have against them. Look out, here I come. The world stands still when I want it to. The landscape in the park is spectacular. In many ways, it is very similar to certain places in Europe. Even Canadian geese, at one time indigenous only to North America, can now be seen in Great Britain and Scandinavia thanks to resettlement efforts. The best way to see Yellowstone's main attractions is to take one of the park's own tour buses. The bus driver doubles as tour guide and explains the special features of the landscape during the trip. Among them, for example, are the Lower Falls waterfalls. No one in the USA panics when they see a bear, in this case a black bear, unless it happens to be a grizzly who is putting a friendly arm around your shoulder. White-tailed deer and all other animals in the park are left pretty much alone thanks to strict visitation rules. That is why they act so naturally, even in the presence of humans. The enemy has another name here, hot water. As romantic as the scene might seem, it is being played out over a gigantic volcanic caldera formed as a result of the wrong subduction angle of the Pacific continental plate being shoved under the North American plate. So it is not primarily the animals which make Yellowstone National Park so attractive for tourists, but rather the mystical steam escaping out of the slime pits and geothermal springs in the park's magma zone. Most of the park, located at an average altitude of 2,400 meters above sea level, lies in the caldera of the Yellowstone volcano. More than 8 kilometers underground lies the 80-kilometer long and 40-kilometer wide and 10-kilometer deep magma chamber of this supervolcano. Water flowing from the mountain seeps into the porous lava rock and is heated by the magma. Having reached the boiling point, it rises back to the surface in the form of hot springs, geysers, or bubbling slime pits. The minerals dissolved in the water solidify during evaporation, creating fascinating shapes. This is exciting and scary at the same time. Out of the largest of the over 10,000 hot springs, the geysers, boiling hot water shoots high into the air with incredible pressure every 60 to 90 minutes. An involuntary shower here can result in very serious burns. By the way, Yellowstone hosts the largest active geyser in the world, the Steamboat Geyser. This is Old Faithful, the smaller of the two geysers. A simmering world waiting for the dramatic moment when the massive magma chamber collapses on itself or the lava finds its own way to the surface. Time and again over the ages, worlds have been built up and then destroyed by the forces of nature. Further to the south, on the Colorado Plateau, a different color of stone dominates the landscape. A high concentration of iron and other minerals give the sandstone cliffs their characteristic reddish coloration. To put it in simple terms, sandstone is sand pressed and cemented together with coarser and finer sedimentary particles. These particles can be clay, silicon carbide, or gravel. Sandstone consists of layers of varying degrees of hardness. Accordingly, natural forces affect the material in unpredictable and unique ways. What in some places still looks like a normal block of sandstone being slowly eaten away by erosion, in other places artworks of nature have been sculpted by those same forces over the same thousands of years. Visitors can enjoy over 2,000 amazing arches and cliff openings in the park. But what is sculpting these wonders of the world, and how do the processes work?
So Sandsteinbögen entstehen, wenn die entsprechenden Gesteine.
Sandstone arches are formed when the stone is exposed to the weather. In the case of the arches, part of the sandstone first breaks down into individual ribs. The cracks have expanded so that the ribs are relatively far apart today. Because of that, of course, wind can get in and blow out loose sandy material. And when wind and frost enter into the picture, then that sort of sandstone wall, one has to say, slowly but surely breaks down. And when that happens in a place inside the stone wall, then a small window breaks out. Small windows become larger openings until complete arched bridges are formed. Then a sandstone arch has been formed by the forces of weather.
Dann habe ich einen Sandsteinbogen entstehen lassen. Als Verwitterung.
The processes of formation and erosion of mountains over the ages can be deduced from the composition of the sandstone and the placement or lifting of the ribs. In Zion National Park, for example, we find rock formations that give the impression that someone tooled them by hand. The distinct gutters weren't cut into the rock by ancient peoples or gravel-carrying glaciers. Sediment deposits and former gigantic bodies of water play a role.
Diese Strukturen gehen auf zwei
These structures were formed by two basically different processes. The vertical structures were formed by flowing drainage water, rainwater for example. The sand has just been washed out. The transverse structures are very old sedimentary structures. Older rocky material was washed out and the sand and clay deposited in tilted layers underwater. That happened again and again, depositing one layer on top of the other. At the moment, it looks like some glacier had driven over it. In our Alps, we occasionally see this kind of formation, but that has nothing to do with those in the Rocky Mountains. Softer layers of rock erode more quickly than harder layers. Both water and wind change their direction of flow dependent on resistance they encounter. That explains the formation of directly vertical patterns, as well as those that run at flatter angles, and even patterns that look like clefts in the cliff faces or oversized fossils. And in a few thousand years, one will surely find a few beautiful arches in Zion National Park as well. Upon closer examination, the various layers of sediment are easily recognized in this good-sized rock face. They might consist of iron, copper, or even gold. Driving through the park's deep valleys, we are reminded of the landscape found in several areas of southern France, the Kimberleys and Flinders Ranges in Australia, or the Dinarian Alps in Croatia. There, one also finds similar deep gorges, where the sun's rays only reach the bottom for a few hours a day. This is a good place to see how water soaks through the porous stone, dissolves minerals, and then forces its way back out of the rock in places where it is especially soft. Small natural paradises with a rich variety of flora and fauna often develop on the floor of this type of gorge. The water not only cascades to the ground over waterfalls or bubbles out of well springs to form rivers, sometimes it exits the rock face halfway down. The water that soaks into the sandstone has to come back out somewhere, of course. There isn't a real well or spring in that sense of the word. The water backs up in a certain layer in the rock and flows out along a broad, flat strip. Mineral salts dissolved from the rock, in this case gypsum anhydrite, is transported to the surface and left as a visible deposit as the water evaporates. That is what these white veils on this rock face are. Plants often grow right on the rock in places where water containing appropriate minerals flows relatively close to the surface. One can't help wondering how their roots can even find a hold. It's no surprise to find bighorn sheep in places like this. Even robust bushes which grow in barren regions are a delicacy for them. Bighorn sheep are significantly larger than European wild sheep or the normal domesticated variety. Not all national parks in the canyons of the southern Rocky Mountains are easily accessible on paved roads. Getting to some of the national monuments can put a significant strain on the back of potential visitors. This kind of drive through the fascinating world of wild rock formations has what it takes to spark the imagination as well. Would it also look like this on Mars? Satellite photos seem to suggest it does. But it is enough for us to take an earthly journey into the wild west of past years. Monument Valley, on the border between Utah and Arizona, was the setting for many films about how settlers and Indians lived in this archaic landscape. Sergio Leone's famous western, Once Upon a Time in the West, was shot here, for example. A well-known cigarette brand filmed modern cowboys, their cigarettes dangling casually from their lips against dramatic backdrops in this area. And not to be forgotten, Tom Hanks' famous running scene in his award-winning role as Forrest Gump was also shot here. Geologist Dr. Darga also has a comparatively sober explanation for this breathtaking scenery. The Table Mountains in Monument Valley have a longer history behind them. It started with a gigantic bowl, a geological bowl. Half the continent was indented. A lot of material was able to collect here, layer upon layer, including the sandstone of today's Monument Valley. This enormous layered area was then raised up nearly 2,000 meters and later eroded. Weathering then modeled the table formations. In principle, the weathering process is always the same. It is interesting to see the variety of shapes the erosive forces carve out. Monument Valley is Navajo land. Indians have been living here for 1,500 years, but the Anasazi Indians who formerly inhabited this area disappeared around the 13th century. Today, about 300 Navajo live in the area and maintain their traditions, such as weaving blankets, ponchos, and rugs from bison wool and the hair from horses' manes. From Monument Valley, we head back toward the Colorado River. Only as we drove the long distances from one attraction to the other did we begin to get the feel for the vastness of the Colorado Plateau alone. Geologically, the plateau is made up of many sedimentary layers. The oldest are visible at the bottom of the Grand Canyon and are thought by some to be as much as 2,000 million years old. In that scenario, this area was covered by an ocean at that time. Tectonic shifts caused mountains to be formed, the sedimentary layers to be raised, and over the ages the Colorado River gradually cut its bed into the rock. At Horseshoe Bend, one gets a good look at how the river found its way around the harder stone layers. The bend in the river is only 10 kilometers downriver from the Glen Canyon Dam. With the help of this comparatively small dam, 96 canyons were flooded besides the Grand Canyon. The end result is Lake Powell, the second largest man-made lake in America. It is a good 350 kilometers long and is the most important source of drinking water for the USA's southwestern states. It is also used to generate environmentally friendly hydroelectric power. It is also a popular recreational area for boating and other water sports. Houseboating is the big hit here. Typical America, relaxed cruising, taking your bed with you, not to mention a cooler for the beer and the meat for the evening barbecue. The lighter areas on the cliffs also indicate another typical American trait, the careless use of resources. In spite of 6 straight years of low rainfall, desert cities like Las Vegas or Phoenix kept using water as if the valuable liquid were pouring down like the monsoon rains in the tropics. In those dry years, the water level fell by 41 meters. The last time the reservoir was full was in 2001. How much water is lost through seepage into the sandstone is hard to say, but man is far more thirsty than nature. Nevertheless, the trip through the labyrinth of flooded canyons is impressive. Born out of a primeval lake and not a river, Bryce Canyon is located in the northwestern part of the state of Utah. At 2,400 to 2,700 meters above sea level, the canyon is at the height of some of the peaks in the Bavarian Alps in Germany. Wind, water, and ice have eroded the edges of the plateau. Looking over the sandstone formations from one of the lookout points is like looking into a sort of amphitheater. The rocks are made of layers of basalt and sandstone. Here, scientists are continually finding valuable fossils and with their help drawing conclusions regarding prehistoric sand beaches, lagoons, and swamps. For the geologist, fossils are an extremely important tool. They provide information about the age of the rock. They can also provide valuable information about the movement of the continents and much more. The fossils, which lived hundreds of millions of years ago, needed living environments, of course, and these environments give us information through the fossils about the formation of entire landscapes. We can reconstruct whether it was salt water, sweet water, or brackish water, or if the stone was sedimented on land. And if you are lucky, you can find something like this, a little mosasaur. He was able to inform us that South America and South Africa were directly connected 270 million years ago. The fossil is part of our collection. Prehistoric messengers like this let us know that different climate conditions used to prevail in the alpine region, for example, and that completely different animals used to live there. Fossils document the vegetation of the time and the creatures living underwater. The significant rock spires in Bryce Canyon, the so-called hoodoos, are up to 60 meters tall. They consist of sandstone sediment layers of varying degrees of hardness from the large Clarin Lake, which must have covered a large portion of the western part of Utah at one time. A good 200 times a year, it freezes and thaws in Bryce Canyon. That wears down the sandstone and provides wind, particularly with a good attack surface. It seldom rains, but when it does, the rain is always slightly acidic because of its carbon dioxide content. That serves to dissolve the sandstone and favors the formation of round profiles. In places where the sandstone contains harder minerals, water erosion has less effect. Magnesium-rich sandstone or even dolomite is found in these parts of the spires. Bryce Canyon got its name from a shipbuilder who worked hard to build an irrigation system for local agriculture. In gratitude, his friends named the canyon after him. His comments, made in jest, that this place was hell for farmers who had to try to find one of their stray cattle in the labyrinth of the canyons, became famous. The rock formations on the Colored Plateau are not only natural wonders in themselves. During the time of winning and settling the West, starting in the 19th century, they were the real backdrop for that adventurous time in history. From about 1903, directors of cowboy films liked to use the original setting, and up until the 1970s built movie sets of entire towns for Western TV series like Smoking Colts, etc. The myth of the wild Western hero continues to influence the worldwide image of America to this day. But that myth does not really line up very well with the actual history of the pioneer years. But regardless of whether it is a real ghost town or just a former movie set, in most cases only ruins remain of the heyday of the Golden West. Over the coming millennia, humankind will certainly leave many more ruins behind, and who knows if man will even continue to exist in its present form. It would be interesting to see what a fossilized New York would look like 50 million years from now. After a visit to the Coyote Buttes at the western edge of the Paria Plateau, one could imagine the possible future of the great sand dunes in Namibia, for example.
The Coyote
Buttes are sand dunes like those that are still wandering in the large Gobi or Sahara deserts today. Here, they are fossilized. Occasional rains in this desert region eat away at these structures. They wash the relatively soft sand away, and in a few thousand years, these structures as we see them today will certainly be gone.
Und in einigen tausend Jahren sind diese Strukturen, wie wir sie jetzt sehen, sicherlich verschwunden.
The fossilized dunes are thought to have originated from a time between 250 and 145 million years ago. They consist of various colored Navajo sandstone. There are no permanent springs or rivers in this area. Occasional strong downpours wash over the land during the summer, and dry riverbeds fill up for a short time. They wash the soft material out of the rock. The wind does the rest. Over the millennia, repeated extreme rainfall has carved so-called slot canyons into Antelope Canyon's walls. Water shoots through the narrow gorges in flash floods and flushes the material out of the rock at high pressure. After the artworks, which look like glacier crevices, have dried out, minuscule particles carried along by the wind continue the erosion process. Our journey through North America's stone paradises along the Rocky Mountains ends at the Grand Canyon. They are more majestic, in many places optically more exciting and more diverse than the Alps, but they are, like all mountain ranges on Earth, related to the European mountain range between France and Slovenia. As witnesses to the early days of our Earth, the mountains have a very special message for us as humans as well. If we listen, we can learn in a very special way that we too are all basically the same, and that, taken as a whole, we are far less significant to the future of this blue planet than the short-term observation might suggest.